She always chose the last seat near the window, not because she had to, but because it felt safe there. From that corner of the classroom, she could see the trees outside, the small patch of sky, and sometimes a few birds sitting on the electric wires. It helped her breathe easier. The music room was never truly quiet. Even when no one was playing, there were whispers, light laughter, or the soft sound of someone tapping on a desk. She liked music more than people. Music did not interrupt her. It did not judge her. It did not laugh when her voice came out too soft. In school, she was known as the quiet one. Teachers often forgot she was present. During attendance, they sometimes paused after calling her name, thinking she might be absent. She would raise her hand gently and say, "I'm here," almost in a whisper. Her music teacher was a strict man with sharp eyes and a louder voice than necessary. He believed that talent needed confidence to shine. In his opinion, a performer had to be bold, expressive, and fearless. He admired students who spoke loudly, laughed openly, and raised their hands quickly. To him, silence looked like weakness. Whenever he asked for volunteers to play the piano in class, several students would rush forward. They enjoyed attention. They enjoyed the small applause from classmates. They enjoyed being noticed. She never rushed. But that did not mean she could not play. Every day after school, she walked home alone. It was a simple house at the end of a narrow street. The paint on the walls had faded over the years, and the front gate made a small creaking sound whenever it opened. Inside the living room stood an old upright piano. Its wood was slightly scratched, and one of the keys was a little lighter in color than the others. That piano had been part of her life for as long as she could remember. When she was very young, someone special used to sit beside her on that same wooden bench. Those hands were older, slower, but very gentle. She had learned how to place her fingers correctly before she even learned how to write long sentences. Music had always felt like a second language to her. But at school, no one knew that. In the music class, she followed every lesson carefully. When the teacher explained rhythm patterns, she understood them quickly. When he talked about complex compositions, she listened closely. But she rarely showed what she knew. One afternoon, the teacher announced something important. "Next month," he said, clapping his hands once to get everyone's attention, "we will have our annual school concert. Parents, guests, and even the principal will attend. This is not a small event. We need our best performance." Excited whispers filled the room. He continued, "I will personally choose the students who will perform. Only those who are ready for the stage." Immediately, hands shot up. "I can play the opening piece. I've been practicing the fast one. Sir, please let me perform this year." The teacher smiled at their energy. He began calling a few names. Each selected student looked proud, almost glowing with excitement. She kept her eyes on her notebook. A small part of her heart hoped her name might be called. Not because she wanted applause, but because she wanted to share what she felt when she played. Music inside a room alone felt beautiful, but music in front of people felt powerful in a different way. Her name was not called. She told herself it was fine. She was used to it. As days passed, concert practice became more serious. The chosen students stayed after class to rehearse. The teacher gave them detailed instructions, corrected their posture, adjusted their tempo. He seemed focused and determined to make everything perfect. One afternoon, while the selected students practiced, she stayed back quietly, pretending to organize her bag. The sound of the piano filled the room. Some parts were good, some were shaky. The teacher stopped them often. No, feel the music," he said loudly. "Don't just press the keys. Understand the emotion." She listened carefully. When the room slowly emptied, she walked toward the piano. She looked around to make sure no one was watching. Then she gently sat down. Her fingers rested on the keys. She did not start with something simple. Instead, she began playing a piece far more complex than anything assigned in class. The melody flowed naturally, like water moving through a quiet stream. Her shoulders relaxed. Her breathing matched the rhythm. For those few minutes, the world outside disappeared. She did not notice that someone had paused near the door. The teacher had returned to pick up some papers he had forgotten. When he heard the sound, he stopped. His eyebrows slightly lifted. He stepped closer, quietly. The music was controlled, confident, and emotional. Not perfect in a mechanical way, but alive. There were dynamics, soft parts that felt like whispers, and stronger sections that carried strength. He watched her for a moment. Then she suddenly stopped. She had sensed someone behind her. Slowly, she turned around. Their eyes met. For a second, neither of them spoke. "You play," he said finally, his tone unreadable. She nodded slightly. "How long have you been practicing that piece?" he asked. "A few years," she answered softly. He seemed surprised but did not show it clearly. Instead, he adjusted his glasses and said, "Why don't you play like this in class?" She did not know how to answer. The truth was simple. Playing alone felt safe. Playing in front of classmates who giggled at small mistakes did not. He gave a short nod. "You may go home." That was all. The next day in class, nothing seemed different. The selected students continued practicing their assigned pieces. The teacher did not mention what he had heard, but something had changed inside him. A week later, an unexpected problem appeared. One of the main performers injured her wrist during sports practice. She would not be able to play in the concert. The chosen piece was difficult and required strong technique. The class felt worried. It was too late to prepare someone new. The teacher stood in front of them, thinking. His eyes slowly moved across the room. They stopped at the last seat near the window. "You," he said, pointing in her direction. She looked up, surprised. "Can you stay after class today?" The room became quiet. A few students exchanged confused looks. After class, she walked toward the piano again. Her heart beat faster, not from fear, but from something she could not describe. It felt like standing at the edge of something important. The teacher closed the door. "I heard you play last week," he began. "We need someone to replace the main performer. The piece is challenging." She waited. "I want you to try it." Her eyes widened slightly. This was not what she expected. She thought maybe he would ask her to play something simple, just to fill time. "I will give you the sheet music," he continued. "You have 3 weeks. But understand this clearly. The audience will be large. If you make mistakes, it will reflect badly on the class." His words felt heavy. She nodded slowly. "I understand." As she walked home that day, her mind was full of thoughts. Part of her felt excited. Another part felt pressure. She knew the teacher's expectations were not warm or encouraging. They were strict and serious. But deep inside, something stronger was rising. This was her chance. That evening, she sat at the old piano in her living room. The late sunlight entered through the window, creating a soft golden light around her. She placed the new sheet music on the stand. She studied it carefully. The piece was indeed difficult. Fast passages, sudden changes in volume, emotional depth that required more than just skill. She closed her eyes for a moment. Then she began to play. The first attempt was not perfect. A few notes slipped. Her timing was slightly off in some parts. But she did not stop. She repeated the section again and again. Hours passed without her noticing. Outside, the sky turned dark. Inside, the small room filled with music. She was not practicing to prove anything to anyone. She was practicing because this piece felt like a story waiting to be told. And she wanted to tell it in her own way. At school, whispers started spreading. "Did you hear? She's replacing the main performer." "Really? But she never even plays in class." "This is going to be interesting." Some students were curious. Some were doubtful. A few even laughed quietly, thinking it would be a disaster. She heard the whispers but chose not to respond. During rehearsal, the teacher listened carefully. He stopped her often at first, correcting small technical details. His tone was still strict, sometimes even sharp. But slowly, something unexpected began to happen. With each passing day, her playing grew stronger, more confident, more expressive. The teacher no longer interrupted as much. He started listening. and for the first time he began to wonder if he had judged her too quickly. The concert day was getting closer, and though no one said it aloud, everyone in the class was waiting to see what would happen when the quiet girl from the last seat finally stepped onto the stage. The news spread through the class faster than she expected. By the next morning, almost everyone knew she had been chosen to replace the main performer. Some students looked at her with surprise. Others looked at her with doubt. A few smiled in a way that did not feel kind. She walked into the music room like she always did, quietly, and took her seat near the window. But this time it felt different. Felt like the air had changed. Conversations became softer when she passed by. She could feel eyes following her. The teacher entered the room carrying a stack of papers. He placed them on his desk and cleared his throat. "As you all know," he began, "there has been a change in the concert lineup. The advanced piano piece will now be performed by her." He did not say it warmly. He did not say it proudly. His tone was flat, almost testing. A few students turned around to look at her directly. One of them whispered, not very quietly, "This is going to be embarrassing." Another replied, "Maybe Sir just wants to prove something." She kept her face calm, but inside, her heart tightened. She had expected doubt. She had not expected it to be this open. The teacher looked at her. "Come, play from the beginning." Her hands felt cold as she stood up, not because she was scared of the piano, but because this time she was not alone in an empty room. This time every sound would be judged. She sat down on the bench. The classroom was silent, but not in a peaceful way. It was the kind of silence that waits for a mistake. She placed her fingers on the keys and began. The first few notes came out steady. She focused on her breathing. Inhale, exhale. Do not think about the people behind you. Think about the music. As the piece grew faster, she felt her confidence slowly return. Her fingers moved smoothly across the keys. The melody filled the room, stronger than before. For a moment, she forgot about the whispers. But then it happened. In one difficult passage, her finger slipped slightly. The sound was small but noticeable. A wrong note echoed in the quiet room. A soft laugh came from the back. She felt her face grow warm. The teacher raised his hand. "Stop!" The silence became heavier. He walked closer to the piano. "This is exactly what I was worried about," he said calmly but firmly. "This piece does not forgive mistakes. The audience will not forgive them either." Her eyes lowered to the keys. "Again," he said. She started over, this time more carefully, slower at first, stronger where needed. When she finished, the room stayed quiet. No one clapped. No one commented. The teacher looked at her for a few seconds. His expression was hard to read. "You have skill," he said finally. "But skill alone is not enough. On stage, pressure is different. You must control your nerves. If you fail, it will reflect on all of us." His words were not cruel, but they were heavy. She nodded and returned to her seat. The rest of the class continued with their own practice, but the mood had changed. The performance had shown them something. She was not untalented, but she was not perfect either. That afternoon, she walked home more slowly than usual. The sky looked gray, even though the sun was still there. She replayed the mistake in her mind again and again. One wrong note, one small laugh, one disappointed look. When she reached home, she did not go straight to the piano. Instead, she sat on the floor near the window and stared at nothing. Doubt began to whisper in her mind. Maybe they are right. Maybe I am not ready. Maybe he chose me to prove that quiet people cannot handle pressure. She hated that thought. After a long while, she stood up and walked toward the old piano. The wooden surface felt familiar under her fingertips. This piano had heard her best and worst moments. It had never laughed at her. She opened the sheet music and started from the difficult passage. Again and again. Each time she made a mistake, she stopped, took a breath, and repeated it slowly. She broke the hard section into smaller parts. She practiced with only one hand, then both hands together, then with her eyes closed. Hours passed. Her shoulders began to ache, but she did not stop. At some point, her mind shifted. She was no longer practicing to avoid embarrassment. She was practicing to master the piece. There was a difference. The next day at school, the teacher announced there would be a full rehearsal on the actual stage in the auditorium. This would be the first time she played in that large space. The auditorium felt enormous compared to the classroom. Rows of empty seats stretched far back. The stage lights were bright, almost blinding. She stood behind the curtain waiting for her turn. The other performers whispered excitedly. Some looked nervous. Some looked confident. When her name was called for rehearsal, she walked onto the stage. The sound of her footsteps echoed lightly. The grand piano stood in the center, larger and more polished than the one at home. She sat down, adjusting the bench slightly. From the stage, the empty seats looked like silent watchers. She began to play. The sound was different here, bigger, richer. It filled the entire space. She had to press the keys with more control. The echoes made small mistakes more noticeable. Halfway through, she felt her hands begin to shake slightly. Not because of the music, but because she imagined the seats filled with people. Parents, teachers, students, eyes watching, waiting. Her tempo became slightly uneven. The teacher, sitting in the front row, raised his hand again. "Stop!" She froze. "Do you feel that?" he asked, standing up. "The stage changes everything. You cannot play like you are alone in your room." His words were not shouted, but they felt sharp. "You must own the stage," he continued. "If you show fear, the audience will feel it." She swallowed and nodded. "Again," he said. She started over. This time she imagined something different. Instead of thinking about the audience judging her, she imagined she was telling them a story. Not asking for approval, just sharing. The music flowed more naturally. When she finished, the teacher did not stop her immediately. He remained seated for a few seconds before speaking. "Better," he said quietly. "But you still hesitate in the fast section. Practice that part until it becomes part of your body." She stepped down from the stage feeling both tired and determined. The days before the concert became intense. Rehearsals grew longer. The teacher corrected small details constantly. Sometimes he spoke sharply. Sometimes he simply watched in silence. One afternoon, after a long rehearsal, he called her aside. "Tell me honestly," he said, folding his arms. "Are you confident you can do this?" The question caught her off guard. She thought for a moment before answering. "I am not confident about the audience," she admitted softly. "But I am confident about the music." He studied her face carefully. "Confidence in the music may be enough," he said after a pause. "But remember, the audience does not know your practice. They only see what happens in those few minutes." She nodded. As the final week approached, whispers grew louder again. Some students had started to change their tone. Instead of laughing, they now watched her rehearsals more closely. "She's actually improving," one of them admitted quietly. "Maybe she won't fail after all," another said. But there were still a few who expected disaster. And strangely, that expectation began to fuel her determination. The night before the concert, she sat at the old piano once more. The house was quiet. The lights were dim. She played the entire piece from start to finish without stopping. No mistakes. No hesitation. When the final note faded, she kept her hands resting on the keys. Her heart was beating fast, but not from fear. From readiness. She realized something important in that moment. The teacher may have chosen her with doubt. The class may have expected her to stumble. The stage may feel overwhelming. But the music was hers. No one could take that away. The next day would decide everything. And for the first time since this journey began, she did not feel like the quiet girl hiding in the last seat. She felt like someone about to prove something, not to others but to herself. The morning of the concert arrived quietly, almost too quietly. She woke up earlier than usual, even before her alarm rang. For a few seconds, she lay still in her bed, staring at the ceiling. Then she remembered. Tonight was the night. Her stomach felt tight, but not in a painful way. It was the kind of feeling that comes before something important. Something that cannot be undone. She got ready slowly. She chose her clothes carefully. Something simple and neat. Nothing too bright. Nothing that would make her feel uncomfortable. She tied her hair back in a way that would not fall over her face while playing. When she stepped into the living room, her eyes automatically moved to the old piano. The morning light fell softly across the keys. She walked toward it and sat down. "This is the last practice at home before tonight," she whispered to herself. She placed her fingers on the keys and began playing the piece. Not forcefully, not nervously, just naturally. She did not stop even once. When she reached the difficult fast section, her hands moved smoothly. No shaking. No wrong notes. When she finished, she smiled softly. For the first time, she did not replay mistakes in her mind. She simply felt ready. At school, the atmosphere was completely different from a normal day. The halls were decorated with banners. Students were running around with last-minute preparations. Some were adjusting microphones. Others were checking the stage lights. The auditorium doors were still closed, but the sound of movement inside could be heard from far away. In the music room, the performers gathered for final instructions. Some were laughing loudly to hide their nerves. Some were sitting quietly, staring at the floor. She took her usual place near the window, even though today there was no lesson. Felt comforting. The teacher entered with a serious expression. "Tonight is important," he began. "Many guests will attend. The principal has invited people from other schools as well. This is not just a small event." A few students exchanged nervous looks. He continued, "Remember what we practiced. Control your breathing. Focus on your timing. And most importantly, do not let fear show." His eyes briefly met hers. "For some of you," he added, "this will be your first time playing such a difficult piece on a big stage." The room went quiet. After the short meeting, everyone moved toward the auditorium for a final sound check. The stage looked different now. Bright lights hung above. Fresh flowers decorated the front edge. Rows and rows of chairs were perfectly arranged. She stepped onto the stage slowly, looking around. Felt larger than during rehearsal. Maybe because tonight it would not be empty. She sat at the grand piano once more for a quick sound test. She played only a few lines just to feel the keys. The sound was rich and powerful. As she stepped down, one of her classmates approached her. This was someone who had laughed during her mistake days ago. "Hey," the classmate said awkwardly, "you're actually good. I didn't know." She was surprised by the sudden honesty. "Thank you," she replied softly. There was no anger in her voice. No bitterness. Just calmness. As evening approached, the sky outside turned orange, then slowly dark blue. Guests began arriving. Parents dressed in formal clothes walked in with proud smiles. Students from other classes filled the seats, whispering and pointing toward the stage. Behind the curtain, the performers lined up according to the program order. She was scheduled to perform in the middle of the concert. Her heart started beating faster when she heard the first applause from the audience. The event had officially begun. One by one, students walked onto the stage and performed. Some sang beautifully. Some played instruments with energy. The audience clapped warmly after each performance. She stood behind the curtain, listening carefully. Each applause sounded louder than the previous one. The teacher stood near the side of the stage, holding the program sheet. His face was serious, but there was tension in his posture. Finally, it was almost her turn. "You're next," he said quietly. She nodded. For a moment, she closed her eyes. She remembered the small living room, the old piano, the afternoons spent practicing alone, the laughter she had heard after her mistake, the doubt in the teacher's voice, the whispering classmates. Then she remembered something else, the feeling of music flowing through her fingers, the peace it gave her, the strength it created inside her. The host on stage announced her performance. There was a brief pause. She stepped out from behind the curtain. The bright lights hit her eyes, but she kept walking. The sound of soft clapping welcomed her. Not loud, not excited, just polite. She walked toward the piano and sat down. From the stage, the audience looked like a sea of faces. Some were smiling. Some were curious. Some were simply waiting. She placed her hands on her lap for a second. Then she took a slow, deep breath. Her fingers touched the keys. The first note echoed through the auditorium. Clear. Strong. The room immediately became silent. She continued playing, each note connecting smoothly to the next. Her shoulders relaxed as the melody began to grow. She did not look at the audience. She looked at the keys, at her hands, at the space in front of her. She let the music guide her. When the piece reached the emotional middle section, she poured everything into it. The soft parts felt like whispers telling a secret. The stronger parts felt like waves crashing against rocks. In the front row, the teacher leaned forward slightly. The audience was completely still. Then came the fast section, the one that had caused her trouble before. Her heart beat faster, but her hands did not shake. Her fingers moved quickly and precisely, almost as if they had their own memory. Every note landed exactly where it should. The rhythm stayed steady. The energy built higher and higher. Someone in the audience quietly gasped. She did not hear it. She was lost in the music. As she approached the final part, she felt a strange calmness. It was no longer about proving anyone wrong. It was no longer about embarrassment or fear. It was about finishing the story she had started. The last notes filled the room, powerful and confident. Then silence. Complete silence. For one long second, no one moved. And then it happened. The entire auditorium erupted into applause. Not polite applause. Not small claps. Loud, surprised, powerful applause. Some people even stood up. She remained seated for a moment, almost frozen. She had expected clapping, but not like this. She slowly stood up and bowed slightly. When she looked toward the front row, she saw the teacher. He was clapping too. But more than that, his expression had completely changed. The doubt was gone. In its place was something closer to respect. As she walked off the stage, the applause continued. Behind the curtain, the other performers stared at her with wide eyes. "That was amazing," one whispered. "I didn't know you could play like that," another said honestly. She felt her cheeks warm, but this time not from embarrassment. The teacher approached her after a few moments. "You controlled the stage," he said quietly. "You controlled the music." She nodded, still catching her breath. "You proved something tonight," he added. She thought about his words carefully. Maybe she had proved something. But more importantly, she had discovered something. Being quiet did not mean being weak. Not seeking attention did not mean lacking talent. Sometimes the strongest sound comes from the person who speaks the least. As the concert continued, she sat backstage, listening to the remaining performances. The fear that had once lived inside her felt smaller now. She had stepped onto the stage with doubt following her. She walked off with confidence walking beside her. And for the first time in her school life, she did not feel invisible. The applause from that night did not end when the concert finished. The next morning at school felt different. When she walked through the hallway, people looked at her in a new way. Not with curiosity, not with doubt, but with recognition. Some students smiled at her as she passed. A few even said, "You were incredible," or "I didn't know you could play like that." Their voices were not teasing anymore. They sounded sincere. She did not know how to respond at first. She simply nodded and said thank you softly. Part of her still felt like the quiet girl who sat near the window. It was strange to suddenly be noticed. When she entered the music room, conversations stopped for a moment. Then someone clapped lightly as a joke. But it wasn't mocking. It was friendly. She walked to her usual seat. The teacher came in shortly after. He placed his bag on the desk and looked around the room. "I hope everyone learned something from last night," he began. "Talent can sometimes be hidden. We must not judge too quickly." His eyes rested on her for a brief second. A few students turned to look at her again, but this time there was no whispering. Class continued normally, but something had shifted. When the teacher asked questions about rhythm and expression, she slowly began raising her hand. Just slightly at first. Her answers were clear and thoughtful. The teacher nodded approvingly. Later that week, something unexpected happened. During lunch break, the principal entered the music room while she was practicing alone. She immediately stood up, surprised. "I heard your performance at the concert," the principal said warmly. "It was impressive." "Thank you," she replied quietly. "There is an inter-school music event next month," the principal continued. "We are considering sending one representative for a solo piano performance. Your name has been suggested." Her heart skipped. She had just overcome one stage. Now another one was appearing. "I will discuss it with your music teacher," the principal added. "But I wanted to tell you personally. Keep practicing." After the principal left, she stood still for a few moments. Another stage, another audience, another test. That afternoon, the teacher called her aside. "You heard about the inter-school event?" he asked. She nodded. "It will be more challenging than our school concert," he said seriously. "The audience will include professional musicians and judges. They will notice every small detail." His tone was not discouraging. It was realistic. "I am willing to guide you," he continued. "But this time, the preparation must be even stronger. No room for doubt." She took a deep breath. "I will try my best." He looked at her carefully, then said something she did not expect. "I misjudged you before," he admitted quietly. "I saw your silence and thought it was weakness. I was wrong." She was not prepared for an apology. "You have discipline," he added. "That is rare." She felt something warm rise in her chest. Not pride, not excitement, just relief. From that day on, their rehearsals changed. The teacher no longer spoke sharply just to test her. Instead, he explained details with patience. He introduced her to new techniques, new interpretations, and deeper emotional understanding of music. He would say things like, "Do not just play the notes. Think about what the composer might have felt." Or, in this section, imagine a storm building slowly. She listened carefully. She asked questions. She experimented with different expressions. At home, the old piano became even more important. She practiced for hours, but not in a rushed way. She focused on tone control, finger strength, and smooth transitions. Sometimes her hands hurt, but she did not complain. Her family began noticing the change too. The house was filled with stronger, more confident music than before. One evening, after a long practice session, she stopped suddenly and looked at her reflection in the dark window. She barely recognized the girl staring back. The same quiet face, the same calm eyes, but something inside had grown. At school, more students began approaching her. Some asked for help with their own pieces. Others simply wanted to talk. "Can you show me how you play that fast part?" one classmate asked shyly. She sat beside them at the piano and demonstrated slowly. For the first time, she was not hiding her skill. The music room no longer felt like a place where she had to shrink herself. A week later, the teacher handed her a new piece for the inter-school competition. "This one requires both technical control and emotional depth," he explained. "It is not about speed alone. It is about storytelling." She looked at the sheet music carefully. It was complex, more layered than the previous one. A small wave of fear passed through her. But this time, she did not let it grow. "I can learn it," she said softly. The teacher gave a slight smile. "I believe you can." Those words stayed with her. "I believe you can." She had never heard him say something like that before. Preparation for the competition became intense. She practiced before school, during lunch, and after classes ended. Sometimes the teacher stayed late just to guide her through difficult sections. One afternoon, during rehearsal on the auditorium stage again, something unexpected happened. In the middle of the piece, her mind suddenly went blank. Her fingers froze. For 2 seconds, there was complete silence. The teacher looked up sharply. She felt panic rising in her chest. But then she remembered something from the previous concert. Breathe. She closed her eyes briefly, found the rhythm again in her mind, and continued from the exact spot she had stopped. When she finished, the teacher stood up slowly. "That," he said, walking toward the stage, is real strength. Mistakes happen. Freezing is human. But continuing is what matters. She stepped down from the stage feeling stronger than before. The fear of mistakes was no longer controlling her. She understood now that even professionals stumble sometimes. What matters is how they recover. The day of the inter-school event arrived faster than she expected. This time, the venue was larger. The stage lights were brighter. The audience included strangers from other schools. As she waited backstage, she felt nervous again. But it was a different kind of nervousness. Not fear of embarrassment. Not fear of judgment. It was excitement. When her name was announced, she walked onto the stage with steady steps. She sat down at the piano, adjusted the bench, and placed her fingers on the keys. The first notes flowed out clearly. The hall became silent. She played with everything she had learned: control, emotion, balance, confidence. She did not rush the fast parts. She did not rush the soft parts. She let the music breathe. At one point, she felt completely connected to the piece, as if she and the piano were speaking the same language. When she reached the final note, she held it gently, allowing the sound to fade naturally. Silence followed. Then applause. Not explosive like the school concert, but respectful, strong, meaningful. As she bowed, she felt something inside her settle peacefully. Whether she won or not, she had already changed. She had stepped out of the last seat near the window. She had stepped onto stages she once feared. And she had discovered that confidence does not need to be loud. It can grow quietly, like music building slowly in a silent room. After she stepped off the stage at the inter-school event, her hands were still slightly warm from playing. The applause continued for a few seconds, then slowly faded as the next performer's name was announced. She walked backstage calmly, but inside her heart was racing. Other students stood there waiting for their turns. Some looked nervous. Some avoided eye contact. A few smiled politely at her. She sat down on a chair near the wall and placed her hands on her lap, pressing her fingers together gently. She replayed the performance in her mind. The beginning had been steady. The middle section felt strong. The emotional part had come out softer than during practice, but in a good way. The ending had been clean. No freezing this time. No hesitation. She closed her eyes and let out a slow breath. The teacher approached her after a few minutes. He did not speak immediately. He simply stood beside her. "Well?" she asked quietly. He looked at her, and for a moment, she could not read his expression. "You played with maturity," he said finally. "Not just skill. That is important." She nodded. His approval meant more to her than she expected. The judges took their time. All participants were asked to sit in the audience while the results were being prepared. She found a seat in the middle row. From there, she could see the stage clearly. The hall felt heavy with anticipation. Whispered conversations filled the air. Some students looked confident. Others stared at the floor. She did not know what to expect. Winning would be nice, of course, but she also knew she had already overcome something much bigger than a trophy. After what felt like a long wait, one of the organizers stepped onto the stage holding an envelope. "The results are ready," he announced. The room became silent. Third place was announced first. Applause filled the hall as a student from another school walked up to receive the certificate. Second place followed. Her heart began beating louder. Then came the pause before first place. And first place goes to... She felt her breath stop. The representative from her school. For a second, she did not move. The teacher gently nudged her shoulder. "That's you." The applause grew louder. She stood up slowly, almost in disbelief, and walked toward the stage. Each step felt unreal. When she reached the front, the organizer handed her a certificate and a small trophy. The judges smiled politely. She bowed slightly. The applause continued, but she barely heard it clearly. Her mind felt calm, almost quiet. As she stepped down from the stage, she saw her teacher clapping with a proud expression. "You earned it," he said simply when she reached him. On the bus ride back to school, her classmates surrounded her. They asked questions about how she felt on stage, how she practiced, whether she was nervous. She answered honestly. Yes, I was nervous. Yes, I practiced every day. Yes, I made mistakes during practice many times. They listened carefully. No one laughed. No one doubted. Back at school, the principal congratulated her publicly the next morning during assembly. Her name echoed through the loudspeaker. Students who had never spoken to her before now knew who she was. But something surprising happened. The attention did not make her louder. It did not change her personality completely. She was still quiet. She still preferred the seat near the window. The difference was that now, when she spoke, people listened. A few days later, during music class, the teacher did something unexpected. He placed a new piece of music on the piano stand and looked at the class. Today, he said, she will demonstrate how to approach a new composition. The entire class turned toward her. She stood up slowly and walked to the piano. This time, her steps were steady. No shaking hands. No heavy heart. She sat down and looked at the sheet music. Instead of playing immediately, she spoke. When I see a new piece, she said softly, I first look at the structure. I try to understand where the emotions rise and where they fall. The class listened carefully. Then I practice slowly, very slowly. Speed comes later. She began playing a short section, breaking it into smaller parts to show how she learned difficult passages. The teacher watched silently. After she finished, he nodded. This, he said to the class, is what dedication looks like. For the first time, she felt not like a student hiding in the background, but like someone who could guide others. Weeks passed, and the story of her performance continued to spread. Other teachers mentioned it in their classes. Some younger students started greeting her shyly. One afternoon, a younger student knocked on the music room door while she was practicing. Can you teach me how to play? The student asked nervously. She hesitated for a moment. She had never thought of herself as someone who could teach. But she smiled and said, sit down. She showed the student how to place fingers gently on the keys, how to press without tension. As she explained, she remembered her own early days. The quiet lessons at home, the patience, the repetition. Helping someone else felt different from performing. Felt warm. The teacher observed this from a distance. Later, he said to her, you have something beyond talent. You have understanding. She did not fully realize what he meant at the time. The biggest change, however, happened inside her. Before, she had played music to escape the world. Now, she played to connect with it. Before, she feared being seen. Now, she understood that being seen did not mean losing herself. One afternoon, while sitting at her usual seat near the window, she looked outside at the same trees and sky she had watched for years. Everything looked the same, but she felt different. The laughter she once feared no longer echoed in her mind. The teacher who once doubted her now trusted her. The classmates who once whispered now respected her. She realized something important. The teacher may have once wanted to embarrass her by testing her in front of the class. He may have expected her to fail under pressure. But instead of breaking her, that challenge built her. Without that moment of doubt, she might have stayed in the background forever. Without that mistake in class, she might never have learned how to control her fear. Without that stage, she might never have discovered her own strength. Success did not come in one single performance. It came from every small decision to keep practicing. Every time she chose not to quit. Every time she decided to try again after a wrong note. And now, sitting quietly by the window, she no longer felt invisible. She felt grounded, confident, not because she won a trophy, but because she had faced the thing she feared most. Standing alone under bright lights and survived it. The music room door opened, and the teacher walked in. There is another event coming up next term, he said casually. I hope you will participate. She looked at him and smiled gently. Yes, she replied, not with fear, not with hesitation, but with quiet certainty. Life did not suddenly become perfect after her win. There were still regular classes, homework, exams, ordinary days that felt slow and quiet. But something inside her had shifted in a way that could not be undone. The The next school term began with new schedules and new faces in the classrooms. The music room smelled the same as always, a mix of wood, paper, and polished instruments. Sunlight still fell through the same windows. The piano still stood in the same place. But now, when she walked in, she did not automatically head for the last seat as if she needed to hide. She still liked sitting near the window, but it was no longer a shield. It was simply a place she enjoyed. The teacher had changed too, though not in an obvious way. He still spoke firmly. He still corrected mistakes quickly. But there was more balance in his tone. Less assumption. More observation. One afternoon, he addressed the class in a serious voice. "Next month, we will host a regional music workshop here," he said. "Students from different schools will attend. Some professional musicians will also come to guide you." The room filled with soft excitement. "And," he continued, looking around carefully, "we will open the event with a solo piano performance." Several students turned their heads toward her without even thinking. She felt their gaze, but this time it did not make her uncomfortable. After class, the teacher asked her to stay behind. "I would like you to open the workshop," he said directly. She took a moment before answering. "Are you sure?" He gave a small, honest smile. "Yes, I am sure." There was no challenge in his voice now. No hidden test. Just trust. That word meant more than she expected. In the weeks leading up to the workshop, she practiced as she always did. Not for attention, not for applause, but because music had become part of her daily rhythm. At home, the old piano continued to carry her through long evenings. Sometimes she tried new pieces just for herself. Sometimes she played old melodies that reminded her of childhood. One evening, while practicing, she suddenly stopped and thought about how everything had started. A sarcastic invitation in class. A difficult piece. A wrong note and quiet laughter. If someone had told her back then that she would one day represent her school and open a regional workshop, she would not have believed it. But growth often begins in uncomfortable moments. The day of the workshop arrived quickly. The school auditorium looked different again. Banners welcomed guests from other schools. Chairs were arranged neatly. Microphones were tested again and again. Backstage, students moved around nervously. Some reviewed their notes. Others practiced breathing exercises. She stood near the curtain, holding her sheet music, though she barely needed it anymore. The teacher approached her quietly. "Nervous?" he asked. "A little," she admitted. "That's good," he replied. "It means you care." She nodded. From the stage, she could hear the low sound of conversations in the audience. Teachers, students, and a few professional musicians were seated in the front rows. The host stepped forward and welcomed everyone. After a short introduction, her name was announced. She walked onto the stage with steady steps. The lights felt warm on her face. The piano waited in the center, silent and patient. She sat down, adjusted the bench slightly, and looked at the keys. For a brief second, she allowed herself to remember the first time she had sat in front of an audience, heart racing, afraid of embarrassment. Now her heart was beating again, but not from fear, from purpose. She began to play. The first notes were soft, almost like a quiet greeting. The audience slowly fell silent. As the melody unfolded, she felt completely present, not thinking about judges, not thinking about expectations, just listening to the sound she was creating. She let the music breathe. She did not rush the quiet parts. She allowed pauses to speak. When the stronger section arrived, her fingers moved with confidence. Not in a showy way, not to impress, but to express. From the corner of her eye, she noticed one of the visiting musicians leaning forward slightly, listening carefully. She did not let that distract her. The piece reached its emotional peak. The sound filled the entire hall, then gently softened again toward the end. When she pressed the final note, she held it just long enough for it to fade naturally into silence. The auditorium remained quiet for a second. Then applause rose steadily. Not explosive, not dramatic, but deep and respectful. She stood and bowed gently. As she walked off the stage, she felt calm. Not relieved. Not overwhelmed. Just steady. Backstage, several students from other schools approached her. That was beautiful, one said. How long have you been playing? Another asked. She answered simply, without exaggeration. I've been practicing for many years. The workshop continued with group sessions and small performances. Later in the day, one of the professional musicians gave feedback to selected students. When it was her turn, she stood in front of him quietly. You play with sincerity, he said thoughtfully. Many students focus only on speed and complexity, but you focus on feeling. Never lose that. She listened carefully. Also, he added with a small smile, do not underestimate yourself again. His words stayed with her. That evening, after everyone had left and the auditorium had emptied, she returned to the stage alone for a moment. The lights were dim now. The chairs were empty again. She walked toward the piano and touched one of the keys lightly. It made a soft sound that echoed gently. This stage had once felt terrifying. Now it felt familiar. She heard footsteps behind her. The teacher stood at the edge of the stage. You've grown, he said quietly. She looked at him, not just as a musician, as a person. She did not know how to respond, so she simply said, thank you for giving me the chance. He shook his head slightly. You gave yourself the chance, he replied. I only opened the door. They stood there in comfortable silence for a moment. On the walk home that evening, the sky was painted in soft shades of orange and purple. The air felt cool. She thought about the journey from that first doubtful moment to now. The teacher who once wanted to test her had become someone who believed in her. The classmates who once whispered now asked for guidance. The girl who once hid in the last seat now walked onto stages without shrinking. But the most important change was invisible. She no longer feared being seen. She no longer felt that silence meant weakness. She understood that strength can be quiet, confidence can be gentle, and mastery can grow slowly, one practice session at a time. When she reached home, she walked to the old piano once more. She sat down and played, not for an audience, not for applause, not for awards, just for herself. The notes filled the small room, warm and familiar, and as the music flowed through her fingers, she smiled. Not because she had shocked anyone, but because she had finally discovered who she truly was.